Oh, traveling keyboard.
Hopefully I can change slides, so yeah, that's all I had. Okay. So, thanks to everyone who got back to me about the draft I sent out. I do appreciate the feedback. Tried to incorporate some changes in this presentation. Basically, it's, well, actually I'll start. So this is the review. So basically this project or task force that I'm proposing is taking the two tasks from last year, which is the infrastructure planning process review and the bike commuting to employment, and expanding them into a Langley Township urban social and travel improvement strategy, which will be headed by a task force. The goal is to combine the existing aims and also expand upon them in context, because I believe some of the points which I've listed out here basically don't quite address the issues in the big picture. So try to think of ways we can do that with this proposal. I'll give a quick summary of the previous tasks from last year's work program. The first was encouraging bike commuting to work. Second was how we can get developers to install facilities to encourage this as well. And the next one was from the planning process review. These two down here were social infrastructure for like public health family programs, and also looking at the impact of climate change. So these new tasks will be as follows, but I'll go into more detail at the end because I kind of expand upon them in the presentation. Firstly, collecting data on current urban investment in Langley, which is which developments are fulfilling community needs, how community plans are being fulfilled, and so on. The next will be collecting data on public programs, facilities, and gathering places. And the next is collecting data on current vehicle cycles and pedestrian travel. The reason collecting data is so we can justify the improvements, identify shortfalls, and so on. And once we do that, we can propose needed investments, changes, or bylaws based on the data we collect, and also considering safety and economic and public benefit as well. We will also determine the source of funding, so we're not just saying do this, you have to pay for it. We're going to say, look, you can get money from here to do this. So that way increases the likelihood that these any changes we propose will actually get done. And finally, presenting them to the township. So I'm going to start off with the budget, because that's the big often the big barrier when it comes to implementing changes is where to get money from. So I'm going to start with that first. This is a very, very simplified idea of how we have to think about the budget. In terms of income, we've got developer incentives. That's when developers build things for free for the city, like as part of a development. And also, if they build more units, we get more taxes over the long term as well, because they're paying more municipal tax. We've also got things like assets, like entry fees for buildings the council runs, taxes, tolls, parking meters. I'm not sure if there are any parking meters, maybe a few around. And expenses, we've got developer rebates. And if we actually start building stuff that costs money, like road, sidewalk, cycle paths, street lighting, there's also maintenance on that, and legal fees, and also grants. So that's pretty straightforward. So as I said, for every proposal, the task force will attempt to propose a source of funding if it's seen as required. Has to be considered though that the funding source might not actually provide immediate revenue. What I mean by that is, again, talking about if we make some change that allows someone to build a bigger building, for example, they'll be paying more tax, but that'll only be after several years we start to see the money coming in. So it's something to think about. And also for like urgent things where someone might get hurt, like hit by a car or something like that, which would be horrible, of course. We may ignore the issues of budget because it's such an urgent concern. And all proposals will be backed by data and research, as I mentioned earlier. So here's some examples: increasing density, increasing municipal tax. This was an interesting one I found. I was actually doing some research about how municipalities raise money. It's quite hard to find stuff online, but I did find this one, which is in Berkeley, California, where they put a ½ cent on every gallon of fuel that people buy, and actually per year they raise about $300,000 just from that, just the ½ cent. So I found that quite interesting. I thought, well, do that on a litre, it could be as much as $1.3 million. That's assuming, of course, everyone fills up in Canada. I'm not sure everyone does. Iceland's right across the line. And also parking meters in Vancouver. A parking meter makes about $10,000 a year. And so if you put 50 meters in, you can make 500,000, but obviously Langley's not as big, or as not so densely populated as Vancouver, so it might not make that much money, but it's just, again, something to consider. So now moving on to the project itself. This is what the task force will do and why I feel the task force is needed. So there's a very broad overview. It will be looking at issues across every community in Langley, from Walnut Road to Brookswood to everything, and kind of looking at it as providing oversight across all the communities, and looking to maybe even increase the standard across all of them, like see if there's a shortfall in one that isn't in another, and so on. Kind of unify, perhaps. This is this is more kind of opinion with some kind of observations I've made of how the current system works. I try my best to kind of figure it out. Right now, every community, and also I think Langley's has a community plan. So what happens is the township will propose a plan, and will get approved, and then once it's approved, developers who want to build in that community will have to follow this plan.
Excuse me, James, I think we have a question here.
Oh, go ahead,
Yeah, on your previous slide, I just wanted to go back and...
yeah, sure, this one.
When you say identify issues, what type of issues
I'll
are
go
you
into more
referring to?
detail in that in later slides.
Okay.
Basically, these are the issues the task force would be investigating, as I said, like infrastructure and how we can... trying to think of how to phrase this. Like if there's a shortfall, like there's not enough, like there's a missing community facility, like there's not enough community facilities, for example, that would be an issue. I hope that explains it, but I'll try and go into more detail. Hopefully it's answered later on. Does anyone else have any questions so far? So, as I was saying, the community plan system works in some well in some ways. For one, it creates a fixed aesthetic or look for the area. Two, it does keep developments in keeping with the style of the area. It does set a standard for development, and anything that is developed has met community approval, because it can't breach the plan. At least that's the idea. However, there are some issues which it does not address. One I've pointed this diagram. You'll have areas where, for example, a sidewalk will abruptly end with an area where a developer has not built it yet, and then resume afterwards. And sometimes these areas can be these areas can be undeveloped for quite a long time, like years. Or a developer might sit on a piece of land, and we're kind of at their mercy right now in terms of getting that infrastructure done. So as I said, the plan may never be fully implemented because it's relying on the developers coming in and then doing it according to the plan. It's not making the whole plan, it's not making the plan happen, it's just saying this is what we would like to see. The plan is also treated as final, and which in some cases means that community, social infrastructure needs are not met. And as I said, developments may need approval, but new developments may never arrive, and we can collect data on these issues and form proposals to resolve them. And finally, why does this matter? If we have patchy infrastructure like this, We're making people feel they have to drive, they feel they can't walk because they don't have to walk out to the road, and increases pollution and traffic congestion. So this is an example of how it fits into the previous task of community employment, is of like walking or cycling, is that these sorts of issues do actually affect that. Another issue is, as I said, social needs are not always addressed, such as public spaces, low rent facilities, and gathering spaces. A typical developer incentive would be to allow someone to build a larger building if they build a community facility. However, we can see in places like Willoughby, there's actually a shortage of these kind of facilities. There's not enough public space or low rent areas that are actually being built. And so we need to figure out why. Why isn't that happening? Why aren't developers taking advantage of these incentives? Or figure out other ways we can encourage them to do this. And finally, some areas like schools, universities, and transit hubs are left unconnected. For example, this is LSS. There's no sidewalk at the front, so children have to walk on the shoulder to get to school. TWU, again, it's just the shoulder. I believe it is marked as a cycle path. And so this has the effect, again, of discouraging people from either walking or cycling. They feel like to be safe, they have to drive. And again, this isn't being addressed with the current system. And finally, there's also a little thing I put here, which is like underpasses, underroads can actually help link communities, but we don't have anything like that right now. We just do bridges over. But yeah, just an idea there. But the issue I think about this is interesting is that the kinds of people who go to university are students who probably don't have a lot of money coming in. So to them, walking or cycling is maybe the only way they get around. So we need to really address that. It's quite a serious concern. So in summary, the mandate of the project, as I mentioned, overseeing the communities. We can use a city planning style approach because we're looking at it from the perspective of a less scattered perspective. What I mean by that is we're not looking at it as a developer, as in part of many developers, a group of many developers, and we're not looking at it as its own community plan, just independent. We're trying to combine that to give us sort of more focused ideas, come up with more focused ideas for the township as a whole. The next is urban investment, which is trying to figure out changes that can attract more better developers for economic growth and fulfillment of community needs. We're also looking at social programs and spaces, improving the quality of life for people and children, and also travel improvement, which will, like changes we can make that will reduce car use and address public health and environmental concerns and improve safety. So really these two right here are extensions of last year's tasks. The only real new one is kind of the urban investment, mainly because that, I'll go into a bit of detail on that in a minute, but again it's part of the context for these two issues. So talking about urban investment, we can look at increasing the desirability of areas through urban investment, bylaws for economic benefit, like zoning changes or incentives for increasing density, developing places and spaces for programs, improving public spaces, also having civic improvements required from developers, and also maybe renewal of areas to be less car-centric or new areas that are less car-centric, so encouraging walking and cycling. And also consider whether these developments will be affected by climate change, considering ways of attracting residents and tourists to the areas, and maybe considering unique things that we could add. The strategy for this, what areas are the oldest and require updating, what things can be done to improve the area cosmetically, what kind of people do we want to work with on this, and just getting public input and determining the plans. The next one is the social investment part of the project. right now the township does not have any social planners compared to other cities in the region in Metro Vancouver, which have, I think, Karen told me that Vancouver has over 100.
No, wait, 14.
Okay, sorry, 14. Apologize for that. And so we have none in Langley, so this may be a reason why some of these issues aren't being addressed. We also need to look into space for non-profit programs, address the shortage of early childhood programming, because there are shortages in the area, and making proposals to the council to consider this type of infrastructure. And another thing is developers are often asked to put in streets and sewers and lighting, but maybe they're not for some reason, they're not contributing community space. Either they're not asked or the incentives aren't appealing enough, as I mentioned, and we can improve the community, come together with these sorts of programs. So talking about travel improvement now, it's important to encourage more walking and cycling. There are areas in the township where people have to walk on busy roads like sidewalks or cycle on narrow roads to narrow unmaintained shoulders. This is a picture on the way to Fort Langley from Walnut Road. You can see the shoulders kind of broken away. New office buildings are being constructed with no provision for bike racks. And the township is kind of rural in nature, but as the population grows, we need to maybe help it transition to a higher standard that we see in other cities. And also people may be unaware of facilities that exist close by. So if we can inform them perhaps that like a bus stop or like a transit hub is within walking distance, they might think, oh, I'll walk there rather than drive, because they may not realize how close it actually is. So that's something to think about as well. So the strategy for that was, again, be improving safety, increasing awareness of existing infrastructure with signage, suggesting improvements to and new infrastructure, trying to reduce and eliminate car use for short trips, and suggesting requirements miles for new buildings to encourage cycling. Of course, it's not just about building infrastructure. There's many elements, what's commonly known as the 4 E's of trying to encourage cycling, which is engineering, encouragement, education, and enforcement. So you can't just build a cycle path and expect people to use it. You have to educate people and also encourage people to use it as well. So that's something we have to consider. So some final thoughts. Why cover so many broad topics? You're probably thinking this is, so many things. But as I said, they are all connected. With more investment comes more public space and more programs. With more travel infrastructure comes more urban investment, because people see the city and want to invest in it. We cannot fully solve the issues by addressing the big picture. And the ultimate goal would be to see a change in the township which balances the needs of developers with the needs of the community, improving the environment, opportunities and results for both. If we work with developers to create more community and pedestrian-oriented areas, then these areas will have to be linked, and it will become more natural, this idea of having more sidewalks and more cycle paths, if there are areas that exist that have to be kind of connected with this system. Right now we have a lot of malls that kind of encourage people to drive there. They're not pedestrian orientated. And although the task of the project will use real data, our imagination for new ideas is still important and will be required for the project. Does anyone have any questions?
I guess, sorry, I'm overwhelmed with, I'm really new at the committee, so I don't know how many tasks we can take on and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But what you just covered was a major planning exercise for the township itself.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. It may seem like a lot, but that's really because I'm just trying to cover everything in detail to make sure I didn't miss anything, really. Going back to the first slide with the list of tasks, those are still just the tasks. So it's like collecting the data, forming a proposal, that's researched and where we're going to get the budget for it and then proposing it. That's still the basic idea. This obviously will be a long task because there's so many areas, and we may not be able to accomplish like a lot of stuff, but maybe make some small steps towards it, and it's kind of the background of why it's important, and maybe I'm trying to make everyone realize why it's important.
Deanna, do you have something?
Yeah, you know, James, I think you've put an enormous amount of work into this presentation, and I can see that you're passionate about change. Just from my own perspective, this is an advisory committee and what you've outlined here is so far beyond my volunteer brain that it's, you know, I think that if we look at it at a completely different level and not try and assume a planning role, which professionals and staff are here for, and council, I see this as just, I think we need to get a lot less involved in the planning side of it.
I'm not suggesting that we do become involved with the planning. In that, what you're saying, like almost like a professional level. But what I am saying is that we have to consider these different elements when we make a proposal. The proposal might not outline exactly what has to be done, but...
Let me ask you this in a different way then.
Okay.
How do you see in all of this, how do you see, just in a short form, the role that this committee can play?
Well, firstly, I'm not talking about just the committee, I'm talking about a task force of people from the committee who are willing to put in a little bit extra time rather than just these meetings.
Sure. So what role?
What role? As an advisory committee, making a proposal that is backed with research, maybe not pages and pages of research, but saying, look, there are these many people using this road. It doesn't have a sidewalk. Let's add a sidewalk kind of thing. Look at this data. Kind of just a way of making a proposal that's more rigid and there's a more likelihood of actually succeeding. That's kind of the idea behind it, if that makes sense. To answer your question?
Perhaps Councillor Richard can step in.
Well, first of all, I don't know that we have the budget or the wherewithal or expertise to even do the survey or even to do this research. So anyway, that's the first question, but anyway, I just, it's way out of my league.
If you want, it seems to me like you've kind of encapsulated all the topics that we really want to try and address at some time in our mandate. And that's what we've kind of been doing with our survey, and trying to pinpoint which ones the public would like us to take on first.
Yeah.
And at least that's kind of my view. Like you've got a great vision there of the things that we want to address.
Yeah.
But I think we kind of got to break it down a little bit, and we're trying to improve the township website, and we're trying to get our survey out to get this. And yes, we want to address climate change, the sustainability charter, and all that. So I think your proposal is good, but we just kind of got to break it down a little bit. Sure.
I see it the presentation as being almost an overview of what we would like to see happen, not necessarily at this table though, and I do agree with
it. Goes beyond.
Because it does go beyond our mandate. I think there are pieces of it within there that we can take a hold of and perhaps do some pieces of work on. And if we took this as sort of a roadmap in terms of multi-years, in terms of things that we'd like to see us as a group taking on, but with the limited staff power we've got around this table, I don't see us being able to do all of that. I think that there are some opportunities though, and I know I was just sharing it with Eric just before the committee meeting started, that the Healthy Community Partnership Committee does have the opportunity to apply for a couple of grants, and I proposed to them that one of them that they might apply for is something to actually look at the whole, how can we assist our development folks in the municipalities, both this one and the city, look at those social infrastructure needs and include them better in planning, so or find a way to make them more attractive to the developers as they come in.
Yeah.
And to maybe apply for one of those grants to do that, which would take forward our agenda of having those types of things like the cycling, washrooms, and other social infrastructure taken care of without us having to do necessarily
That
the
sounds
work.
like more like a work item that we can deal with.
But
In a work item.
but the piece that has to be done is that I know I got back from somebody in social, in planning here, that they don't have the staff resources to pull together these types of projects, but maybe we could assist with doing the application. They could review it, and it could help bring in somebody to do that piece of work in partnership with municipal staff and with ourselves.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, I know that some cities have done that in the past. We were talking about bringing a company in to, reinvigorate like a certain area of the city that needs it, or so on and so on. So I can see what you're saying there, an actual professional to do it. That does make sense.
It would mean that we would have to work with staff in terms of, the parameters and so on, so that the proposal could be pulled together that would work for the municipalities and also get at some of the areas we're interested in.
So, Councillor, you got to
Yeah, it's just, you really got my gears rolling here, and of course, I guess I have the advantage of seeing a little bit about what's going on from the whole perspective in the township. But one of the things that I wanted to suggest you throw it out, instead of you guys like taking this whole thing on yourselves, have you thought about outreaching to the other committees? And the reason I'm going to say that is because like right now the Seniors Advisory Committee is working on an age-friendly strategy for the township. We're putting together an age-friendly plan. And of course, part of being age-friendly is about being able to accommodate the needs of children right through to seniors, looking at things like travel and transportation and things like that. So I think there's an opportunity for dialogue there. We've also got our transit, our transportation and public safety committee. I could see a liaison there. I know one of the things that the Seniors Advisory Committee has been pushing for is to get a higher percentage of adaptable housing units. So we're actually meeting with the Economic Development Advisory Committee to talk to them about how we outreach to the development community in terms of seeking more support for getting higher adaptable housing things. So I think there's bits and pieces that you're doing here that other committees might be very interested in as well. And maybe the first step, and I agree with what Deanna was saying, it's easier to go with like little chunks of things or baby steps first. Yeah. But there's all these committees that we have, and they're all doing their own thing. Maybe what you guys provide is the opportunity to bring it into a cohesive whole through that outreach.
I think you're right. What's being proposed here is really all of the advisory committees. It's really a pooling of everybody's effort. Everybody's mandate, so that we don't have a committee of committees.
Yeah, that'll be the next level of bureaucracy.
I was just going to say that as well as that, there are other groups in the community that are looking at exactly the same, the subcommittees of the Healthy Community Partnership and so on. Are all
the Seniors Action Advisory Roundtable,
etc.
Yeah.
So they're all looking at similar issues. So it would make sense to try, and maybe that is a way to use. I mean, if we did apply for that grant, that might be a way to assist us in terms of pulling together information and assisting the township and the city's staff in terms of where does it go from, what can we do as a city, as municipalities in terms of improving?
Well,
the plan?
one of the things that just pops into my mind, council has approved for seniors to get a consultant to come in and help us develop this age-friendly plan, which we need to get the official BC age-friendly designation. And this consultant, part of what they're going to be looking at, of course, is infrastructure, which means that I think there's an opportunity for you guys to connect with that consultant too, even though it's going to be part of the age-friendly, it's still infrastructure. And what's the old saying, if you build a city for a child, you're building it for everybody? So...
Well, it makes sense in sidewalks. You need sidewalks if you're disabled or whatever. Then you just want for everyone, really.
I don't think we can probably resolve what we're going to do with this. Because we still have to get on, where does this fit into our work plan? We have to bite off a manageable, chewable chunk somewhere. If there's something out of this, there's probably a few other ideas that come forward. I've got a couple, I don't know whether they're worth pulling out or not, but they'll come to that under the work